Somebody call a doctor.
I want a bigger logo. You can't handle a bigger logo.
G'day, this is the Dr. Branding Podcast. I am your branding Dr. Frank. The surgery is open. Let's answer our next patient's question. Here we go. Today comes from Beck in Australia. Beck asks, what is the difference between a brand identity and a visual identity? Or are they the same thing? Beck from Australia, thank you for that question. Very straightforward. Today we're going to do a differential diagnosis. What's the difference? I've been watching too many episodes of that TV show House. So differential diagnosis is coming into this when we have a question about one or the other. Are they the same? Are they different? What's the definition of this particular thing? So we're talking about brand identity and visual identity. Diagnosis of what is what. There's no real prescription to this either. It's dependent on what your skill set is and how you approach it, but we'll come back to that in a sec. Brand identity and visual identity, yes, I think they're two different things, but a visual identity is part of a brand identity. So that's where we're leading to. A brand identity can look like different things to different branding professionals, depending on what they can produce. So you could be called a brand identity designer, and your output is just focused on the visual. You don't focus on messaging or an internal kind of identity or what some people might call a strategy based on your purpose and vision and values and personality. You might just focus on the visuals only. And a visual identity in that sense is very much what it sounds like, is how you visually portray your brand, your business to your customers, to your clients, to your consumers, to your audience, so that they can visually distinguish your brand over another. So we're talking things like color, fonts and text and typography, how text is used, and then obviously things like logos, logo marks, symbols, icons, patterns, what else? Mascots, any other kind of visual treatment that you know is their style of visual output. And in case in point, Apple and Airbnb had a very distinct style about their video advertising. And that could be, arguably called their part of a visual identity language, how they show up consistently so that you know it's them when you see that visual, even before you see something like a logo or that their name is mentioned, things like that will help distinguish their brand over another. It's not to differentiate, it's just to make sure that we are distinctive in the market so that people do recognize your brand, your client's brand, and then remember it again and again and again so that they do stand out in the crowd so that they can see it and they remember it and all the good things. So that's a visual identity. You might call it something completely different. That's okay. It might all come down to semantics, especially the language that you use might not be English. You call it something different. That's okay. In terms of the output, that's what I see as a visual identity. And there are fantastic visual identity only designers and branding professionals out there that just focus on the visual communication aspect of their output. They specialize in it. They might team up with somebody else or several other people, or they're part of an agency that their role is just the visual, or their team's role is just the visual. And then there's other people in their wider team that focus on things like messaging, strategy, all that kind of stuff. And even things like a sonic identity. So let's talk about, I'm alluding to all these different things within what is a brand identity. And to me, a brand identity is everything that a brand can be recognized and remembered for, to again distinguish one from another, or to at least guide some kind of internal understanding of why we exist as this brand and how do we show up so that everybody in that team can show up day to day on brand and communicate a consistent message, a consistent visual to be identified and engaged with. Just like our own identities, we are not just confined to how we look, our visual representation. We have a personality, we have certain things or ways of how we say certain things, being our message. We have, little sounds we might make, that are distinguishably ours, certain mannerisms maybe as well, but also, an unrealized or realized purpose, or same thing with values, what we show up for every day to do, what is our purpose in life, if you are lucky enough to really understand what that is in your life. It's not to say that you're unlucky if you haven't, but that's an identity. And that's why I think, if you look at a brand identity as not just being the visual, this is where we look at a wider picture of what a brand identity can be. So if we start from the higher level, the stuff that doesn't necessarily need to be communicated to your consumers, be it your customers, clients, audience, is this idea of some kind of central theme, I think, around a brand and what it stands for, so that your message can be influenced by it, your visuals can be influenced by it, your sounds can be influenced by it, and every other brand experience, be it your packaging, your signage, can all be brought back to this one central core idea, I call it, this core identity. And that can be a couple of words, it could be a sentence, something that just really pinpoints what is this brand, to then influence all the other things. And if you looked at it like a spider web, I give this visual example a lot, your brand web in a sense, if you have this core idea in the center, and then everything else that radiates out from it all comes back to the center. So the layers that you have out from that brand web could be that internal identity of what your brand culture is, be it your purpose, your brand values, your personality. Maybe you have a higher mission and vision for what you want to achieve beyond the day-to-day. So let's say, for an example, purpose is we want to help people secure real estate, but our higher mission and vision is to help the community grow and expand so that we all have, these great opportunities to bring more people into the community through housing and things like that. But we support the community to help sustain growth and things like that. If it's sports teams, if it's local charities, if it's local clubs, things like that, you have a higher mission and purpose. And that elevates your brand to something more than just what it is by what it sells and does. And then you've got things like your personality, and this can become inherent in who you are and who your team is, how you all engage with one another. That can be what is foundationally the brand personality, and that's the expectation of any newcomer that comes into your team to live up to that personality expectation of how they can show up on brand. So that can be that internal identity, I call it at least. Some people call this a brand strategy. That's okay. Again, it's a bit semantics. I see strategy as something completely different. But in terms of that core part of your brand identity, that starting point that starts in the middle, starts from the heart, I guess you could call it. Simon Sinek calls it your why. I don't quite agree with that, but that's okay, because it's a little bit too simple. But in terms of that identity, there's different facets that can create where it starts from. And then we want to exude that to our consumers, to our clients, our customers, and our audience in different ways, in different mediums. It can be first that message, and this is how I like to do it sequentially, is first create the internal identity, then do the message, then do the visuals, and the sonic identity as a result of it. So message. Your tone of voice, how your mannerisms in terms of how you speak, is it positive and uplifting? Is it very serious and considered? Is it more empathetic and understanding? You might work for a funeral home, like things like that, or you're in a hospital setting where you do need to be professional, you do need to be empathetic, and you do need to be, all the other things that come with it. That can be the essence of what kind of voice you put out there in terms of the message that guides as a result. In terms of messaging, you can have things like taglines, slogans, selling and value propositions in terms of what do you offer and what benefit do you give, call to actions, prompting somebody to do something next to get engaged with your product or service. You can have a story, and this can become the foundational understanding of why this brand exists that you have or your client has. And telling a story about how it was formed, but also telling the story of what they want to do or what you want to do for your consumers. What do you want to see them achieve? Make the story more so about them rather than yourselves. You can do a little bit about yourself, obviously, to get the inception kind of understanding, but it needs to lead back, I think, to your your customer, your client, your audience. And then you've got other brand language of, why choose us? How do we do it differently? What's the process involved? What things can you expect? What's the benefit of doing this? Kind of like an FAQ in a sense. These are all the bits and pieces of messaging that you can bring to the table. Obviously, over time, that message will slightly shift depending on the context, but we can create some messaging as a good platform to then grow from as a brand, and not use it, I guess, prescriptively, is what I try and say to my own clients, is have this message as a foundational understanding of how you can then use messaging in different contexts and grow beyond just something that is in your brand guidelines of some foundational messaging. It's just there to help guide new messaging as it goes. So you might create an ad campaign and you want to make sure that it is on brand in terms of the voice. You look back at your foundational brand message and say, yep, that sounds like us. We can create a new message from that, sort of like a slogan or something for a brand that feels like it is on brand and represents what the brand stands for. And then from there, you've got your message. Okay, and then we get to the visuals. I've explained what the visuals are, obviously, but you've got that visual that can be influenced by the message, and it can be influenced, obviously, by the internal identity, as I call it. Can even be, and it probably should be as well, influenced by the strategy involved in terms of who you are targeting, what market that you are in, so that you are not competing with somebody having the same colors or tagline or all these different things. We want to separate ourselves. We want to be distinctive. But that's where brand strategy comes in, the targeting, the positioning, and the objectives that we have to make sure that our brand is winning. That's what, to me, is brand strategy in a very quick nutshell. So we've got the visuals. Okay, so how we visually show up so that your team can show up on brand day to day, be it in a uniform or things that they can wear that are brand colors. For an example, just on this visual identity thing, rather than just the logo and your colors or whatever that have to be splashed around, say, your office space or in your website or in your social media, your team can show up not necessarily with a uniform, but with colors that are within the scope of your brand colors. So my wife, she works at a dentist. Their main brand color is maroon, and she'll work with a maroon shirt on that she has in her own wardrobe to match and be on brand with the surgery. Their nurses, they all wear maroon scrubs, kind of like my pink scrubs. I am on brand in terms of how I show up. This is another example here in terms of how I'm being on brand with the different elements that I can bring to the table, rather than it being, a name tag with the name and then the logo next to it, or not necessarily needing to wear a uniform, depending on the type of business that you're in. But showing up in different ways. It could be even the flowers that you have in your office space. Can you get flowers that are similar colors to your brand colors? Stuff like that. So there's the visuals. The last one in terms of brand identity that can be included here, very much overlooked here, is sonic identity, or in other words, I'm not talking about Sonic the Hedgehog, but sonic is in sounds. You could also call it audio branding if you wanted to. And there's many other different things you can do. But you can have these different sounds that can become very distinctive assets to your business, in that sound can invoke that feeling immediately. It can set the tone for what kind of personality you have, be it music or jingles and things like that. That can become quite memorable and stuck and ingrained in our head. If you've ever watched as many ads as I probably have over my lifetime, there's some ads that really get stuck into your head. I remember a Pizza Hut ad, and their phone number is still ingrained in my head. 94811111. Pizza Hut delivery. Like, that was the jingle. I didn't really sing it, but you get the point. Like, these things can become ingrained into our psyche, so that when we do hear them, just like when we see something, we instantly recognize or think of the brand. Even if it's out of context, that music or sound might be somewhere else, but you still come back to thinking about what it is you relate it to, those associations that we have when we see these different brand marks or sounds or smells even. So a sonic identity in itself can be the logo animation. If you might have heard the Netflix opening "Cha-chung" before each of their originals, the Apple startup logo, things like that. You could have mascots that have a certain sound. Mario from the Nintendo world, here we go, or the coin sound, ba-ding kind of thing. Like all these types of sounds that can be distinctive little assets. You could have jingles as well, like an opening titles music, like a podcast title that could become distinct and unique, rather than using, like I kind of have a stock bit of music that I use intertwined with some other little audio sounds. But this can help make your brand distinct, and people are in the frame of mind when they hear it or see it or read it to know, okay, this is this brand. One other thing that, again, with the senses, we've got sight, we've got sound, we've got reading, writing, all the rest of it. Audiobooks type of thing as well. Voices, a distinct voice, like a Morgan Freeman type of voice that you might hear. But there is this element of smell, and not many brands are really going to be able to live up to that expectation of smell. But smell can be another distinctive quality that you could bring to the table with your brand. If someone comes into your space and they have that sensory overload in a way of an identifiable smell, so that they know that they're in that store. If they're walking by your store and they smell it. I remember there's a store called Lush. They sell things like bath bombs and things like that. It was a very full-on experience walking past or in there. I've never walked into the shop because it was so intense, but that's because all their products have that smell. They have that very intense floral or citrusy or fruity kind of smell. And becomes a very distinctive quality to their brand. Hotels have this. I think when you walk into a lobby, you have some sort of inviting smell. I was in a hotel in our Australian Capital Territory in Canberra, and that had a very nice and pleasant smell when I walked in there. I'd hazard a guess if I walked into another one and they had the same smell, I'd be like, oh, that's a nice distinctive quality for your franchise that has this particular smell. So there's lots of different things I guess we could say is packed into a brand identity, but it comes back to these distinctive qualities of what makes our identity our identity rather than someone else's identity. What can we do to show up that makes us different in a sense? Now, one other aspect I guess I haven't really touched on in terms of the brand identity is I guess the personal branding aspect of things. Like we've touched on messaging and kind of how we look and dress, but it can be other distinctive features, like me for having a beard or painting my nails pink or, my hairstyle or whatever it might be. If that's part of your brand, you can lean into those visual qualities or, the hand signals or things like that you might do with your body in different ways. I don't know. I'll leave that to your imagination. But these, again, can become distinctive qualities to your brand's identity of what people recognize and remember you for over others. And that's the kind of game of what you could do. So now, having said that was a very long differential diagnosis, and I went into the weeds a bit, I think, in the essence of creating that distinction between the two, to say that a brand identity is more than just the visuals. That age-old saying for most branding professionals is that your brand is more than a logo. Very much, I think I've demonstrated that. Now, in terms of, let's say back here, what's the difference between the two? If you are only and I say only very nonchalantly, it's not to be serious and take anything into that. If you are only a visual identity designer, there is tremendous value still in just doing that. And again, just very nonchalantly in saying that, because that is still a very high value that people don't recognize the true value of visuals until it's not there. It's one of those things, there's an age-old saying as well, I think it's design is 99% invisible. And this can be anything from branding to the design of a kettle to how a door is opened or closed. When it doesn't work, that's when people start understanding, there's something wrong here kind of thing. But if it's doing its job, it should be invisible, let's say. But there's tremendous value in getting that invisibility right. So please don't discount yourself here in terms of a prescription of what you could do to be of best value here, be it a brand identity designer or a visual identity designer. You could call yourself both if you do just the visuals only. But if you are offering, the visuals, you've got things like logos, you've got colors, you've got type, you've got the whole demonstration of how to use those visuals in context. So you show, mock-ups and things of how this visual identity can be applied to your signage, to websites, to packaging, to stationery, merchandise, all these different things to really show the flexibility of this brand, the dynamicness, is that a word? The dynamics maybe of how that brand can be used in context, and then put that into a brand guidelines to give some parameters maybe around it, or at least just some inspiration to show how this brand could be applied. And then that to me is tremendously valuable of how someone then goes out and uses it as a very valuable asset to a business. You look at the Nike logo. That logo to Nike is worth an estimated $26 billion. If they took it away, it would be a huge loss to their business, I think, in terms of recognition and a huge amount of advertising promotion to educate people on a new brand mark. This is why we don't want to change branding all that often when we get to a level of recognition, because there's some equity in your visuals. And this is why I say it is valuable to help someone produce a updated or a new visual identity, because in the long run, if they keep it, there's equity in that over time for that brand to constantly use and show up, because people recognize it over another and they think of that brand because they remember what it looked like. So they go hunting for it again on the shelf or online or on social media, wherever it is, over someone else. So this is why it's valuable. If you want to go beyond that in terms of doing other aspects of a brand identity, please try. There's no harm in, I think, going beyond just the visuals. If you have the aptitude and the capabilities to write and do messaging, and that be an added benefit to your visual output. Because I've found that very much so in terms of creating messaging before doing visuals helps me get a good understanding of what kind of tone this brand needs to be communicated visually as well as verbally, so that they go hand in hand and they feel like they work together in a way that is consistent, is understandable, is appropriate, and one influences the other. That's why I do this linear kind of process. So if you have that aptitude to do it, try. You can only get better. I kind of feel like that's the case, especially even for visuals, but also for messaging. If it's a bit out of your comfort zone, obviously look up some books, read more, get a sense of how to write in engaging, tones of voices other than your own, especially to capture that magic of what that brand is putting out into the world. It might be a very serious brand and it might feel a little boring potentially depending on the industry. But I think when you go to do that visual, especially when you do things like mock-ups of a website or some stationery, an ad billboard maybe, you've got a message to work with, and that really then shows off your visuals even better, I think, again, because it really puts it into context and they can see everything coming to life on paper, right in front of them, rather than just showing a logo on a billboard by itself and going, what do you think? Or on a business card and going, what do you think? Bringing all these different facets together, I think, creates a much stronger end output that can really sell your design, your visual aspect, even better. And then the other parts to it, the purpose and values and personality, if that's all you did, I think that's very achievable for any visual identity designer to also do. What does this brand get out of bed every day to do? That is the purpose. What do we value? What's 3 things that this brand really leans into day to day that can form a culture for the team to live up to? Not things like integrity and communication. Like some of these things can be very generic, but we can put them into a bit more deeper context to them and what these particular words mean to them distinctively or uniquely, should I say. And that can form a culture where they can hire people based on those values. Do they align with those values? No. Maybe we need to look at other people. Things like that. Then same thing with personality. Can we get people in that match this sort of personality so we can all work together well? It's not to say that you can only hire people based on that personality traits, because having some clashes in personality sometimes can produce results depending on the type of business that you want to foster. But again, I think you can capture those three things just from having a conversation with your clients and getting a sense of how they talk to each other amongst themselves, and what they value and what they want to stand up for in terms of, and what they do in terms of purpose, values, and personality. That would cover it very easily. So gives you that foundational understanding of what the business is so that you can create a great visual as a result of it, and a message if you're interested in it. In terms of the sonic identity, it's a little bit more specialized, I think, in terms of how you can help a client with that. But this is where I want to get to in terms of maybe offering more to a client, a more well-rounded identity, let's say, rather than just the visuals. Not to say, again, that it isn't valuable just by itself, is to engage with other creatives. Engage with other branding professionals that can do these other things, be it messaging and copywriting, be it an internal identity, which might be a strategist that does that side of things as well, by looking at their targeting, looking at their positioning, and then figuring out what their purpose is and their values and personality as a result. Or a music producer that can do sonic identity, be it a logo and even an animator that can animate a logo and intro title sequences and things like that for a brand to really show up with distinctively. We can engage with all these different professionals, bring creatives together and create a well-rounded identity that shows up in many different facets for many different contexts, be it a social media video, be it an ad newspaper, a newspaper ad, a newspaper ad, or an audio only podcast, something that is distinctively, you can't see anything, all you can do is hear, and to be distinctive in that sense. All these different things you can do by pairing up with other people to create this. So that is my prescription in terms of what you can do if you are a visual identity designer, if not a brand identity designer, and what you can do to go beyond it, but also realize that you are valuable in terms of a visual identity output if that's all you do. If you are a business owner and that was of any interest to you, fantastic to see the value of what you could do beyond maybe just your logo and your colors potentially. I hope that is of benefit to you. But I would say, look, thanks again for your question, Beck. It was an interesting topic to understand the difference and communicate that difference. Thanks for those of you listening as well. Please take a piece of brand candy if you haven't already. It's my free resource guide that you can get at g'dayfrank.com/candy. You can make an appointment via that link as well for a future episode, and I'll see you in the next appointment in my next episode. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening. The surgery is now closed. The Dr. Branding Podcast is hosted by Reagan Frank McCrill, that's me, and for legal reasons I want to be clear that I am not a registered or qualified doctor. The premise for this podcast is that it is a satirical analogy for branding consultancy to help others with their brand success. This podcast is also sponsored by my branding business, G'day Frank. Say g'day today by booking a call with me at g'dayfrank.com.